Sam Nestler joins the show to talk about the Stars' impending offseason, free agency, the draft, and more, all coming up next on Locked On Stars.
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Joey Erickson, former producer of 105 Through the Fan. Please be sure to subscribe. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making us a part of your day and making us your first listen. It's my pleasure to introduce a friend of the show, Sam Nestler, once again. I know he hopped on with Dane a few times, and it's about time I asked him to join. And how are you doing? How's the offseason treating you so far, Sam?
Yeah, I'm good, Joey. Thanks for having me on here. It's been quiet, getting used to not having hockey every night, but everything's been good.
Absolutely. And, the Dallas Stars have an important offseason upcoming as they try to get over the hump next year. And we're going to dive into free agency. More importantly, Matt Duchene and Chris Tanev, some possible re-signings for the Dallas Stars, the draft, and a bunch more on today's episode. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So I'll begin here. I want to begin with this Stars postseason run in general. We've had about a week and a half now to kind of chew on it. From your perspective, Sam, was there something we missed in this series against Edmonton? Was there's something else that we're all looking at that maybe we just glossed over that had a big impact on this series? Or was it just simply the power play just was absolutely nothing and the offense fizzled up? From your perspective, what was it?
Yeah, there's not one thing, in my opinion. I think that they look tired. I know that Pete DeBoer talked about, you got to find a way. No one's really fatigued at the end of this year because of the adrenaline's going, but that's just not always the case. They looked drained. They looked like they put together stretches here and there. Obviously, Game 6 was great. But it would have been really interesting to see if they had won, how they would have looked in Game 7, because it just felt like they were running on fumes. And I don't know a lot of teams that win a series without scoring a power play goal, especially when the other team is scoring, 4 in the last 2 games on all 4 chances. So I think it was just, was it the 5 defensemen getting tired out? Was it not getting enough from certain guys, so other guys were shouldering the load? There seems to be a lot of things that kind of came together for this to happen. But I just want to say one thing that people forget, and even me, I forget a lot. A lot of other teams would love to lose in the Western Conference Final.
Yes.
Just to get to that point is such a huge accomplishment. It's so hard to get to that point, but you also got to understand it's disappointment, especially when you feel as good about a team as Stars fans did this year.
And you also factor in from those first 2 series, and this is something I picked up just from watching Game 1 between Edmonton and Florida in the Stanley Cup Final, just the way Florida is not afraid to go after 97. And maybe maybe some of that fatigue kind of leaked into their game. There just wasn't any nastiness from Dallas in that series against Edmonton. And you saw a bit of it against Colorado and Vegas. It wasn't overly physical, but there was just none of that against the Oilers. And I think if Dallas maybe had some fresher legs and they were able to get after McDavid a little bit, just try to rattle him. And albeit some of it is illegal from Florida's side of things, but when has that ever stopped them? And it obviously had an effect on Game 1 to some degree. I know Edmonton pretty much dominated and Bobrovsky played well. But that's the way it goes sometimes. And as McDavid said, maybe it's the hockey gods getting us back from game
that was
stretch.
funny. That was
yes.
funny.
I do want to switch over to this. And you mentioned some teams would love losing in the Western Conference Finals the past couple years. So this may sound spoiled and a bit of an overreaction, but when it comes to Pete DeBoer, there is sort of a trend now. There's a pattern when he gets to this point where the power play is unable to find the back of the net. And for the most part, the offense seems to seize up a bit. if we're sitting here at the same time next year talking about this, and we're going into another offseason where the Stars haven't got over the hump, do we have to start questioning Pete DeBoer to some degree? And he's been fantastic. I'm not on the fire DeBoer train by any means, but look, teams move off of great players and teams move off of great coaches to get the job done. And is this a serious conversation next season if Dallas does the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you're wrong in saying that at all. And I think there's a time where you can't just be, the people say at the beginning of the season, it's great to be a contender, but you have to do it. You have to produce, you have to get there. The Stars have now done that. They looked like a contender for a couple of years. Now they've gotten to the point where they legitimately looked like they could have won the Stanley Cup this year. But at some point you have to get there. And Pete DeBoer's had problems doing that. He hasn't won. He's got this great record of bringing teams to the final, bringing teams to the conference final, but then finding a way not to win. And that's, as tough as it is, this is probably the hardest sport to be a coach in. And like you mentioned, people are getting fired left and right. The Oilers are a perfect example of that, where they start off slow and they say, you know what, we can be better. They fire their coach, and look what's happened now with Chris Knobloch. So I don't think it's wrong to think that. I think that at some point you have to get over that hump. And this, whether it's Pete DeBoer or whether it's the Stars in general, who obviously haven't won a cup in a long time, they have to figure out a way to turn this, elite group into a Stanley Cup champion, because this is now the first year where I really felt like the NHL recognized what the Stars have. You didn't see the media talk a lot about their mix of young players and veterans and their, 4 former captains that are on their teams and all that kind of stuff that people around the team knew for a few years. Now the NHL took notice, the media took notice, and they were getting hyped up like crazy before the year or before the playoffs, and they still find a way to fall just short. So at some point, you're right, you have to get there. And if we're sitting here next year and watching a Stanley Cup final that doesn't include the Dallas Stars, unless, for this type of reason, there obviously can be other reasons that can lead to that. But if it's kind of, they looked really good and then all of a sudden they fell short in the second round or third round, it's a conversation that has to happen. And I hope that doesn't happen, because I think Pete has been so good for the group. Yeah. But you're right. It's like, he's been so good for the group, and then they hit this certain point and they get outplayed, and that's what happened again.
Yeah, and he deserves a ton of credit for the elevation of Dallas offensively, number one from the past few seasons. It's a considerable jump they've made, and obviously that helps with the way that the roster has been constructed. And I think heading into next year, you have to feel pretty good about your forward groups, and of course you have some pending RFAs and UFAs that have to get sorted out. But for the most part, you're talking about some role players and some fourth line guys. The considerable weakness is obviously on defense, and I was honestly pretty shocked that Dallas made it as far as they did, with rolling with just 5 defensemen for the majority of the postseason. And Petrovic slides in and does a pretty decent job. It almost, bears the question, why wasn't he playing at the at the very beginning of the playoffs? Because he at least was giving you minutes. Well, now Dallas has some questions, right? Who knows with Chris Tanev? Ryan, as of right now, you have Miro, Essa, Suter, and you're hoping Harley, and you're hoping some others re-sign. So there are some big questions on the back end. And I know there's a big buyout Suter crowd, and I would be, on board for that as well. But it doesn't seem like that's feasible right now with the way it's constructed. So I'm curious from your perspective what you feel about the D-core moving forward, because they obviously need some upgrades, and you're hoping Liam Bixel's gonna make an impact, but same time, he's going to be 20 years old, and you may have to go through some Harley growing pains to begin. So what do you make of the D-core?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you one word for the Stars blue line this year: weird. It was so confusing, because you have Thomas Harley, who looked like a 28-year-old in his prime during the regular season, especially when he was scoring with 4 overtime winners in the span of 3 weeks. But then all of a sudden he struggles mightily in the playoffs and looks like a totally different player. And then you have Lundqvist, who has shown so many signs that he could be so good. And then doesn't have any trust. And I think a lot of fans are having that Julius Honka type of feeling, where free Lundqvist, but then he gets freed and he makes a huge mistake and it goes in the back of the net. So it's like, all right, I don't really know where to stand anymore, but it would make it so easy for the Stars if Lundqvist could just be what he could be, right?
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't need to be a Miro Heiskanen. He doesn't even need to be a top pair guy. They have those guys in place, but someone to maybe slide into next to Lindell on the second pair or something like that, it would just make it so much easier. But that's not the case. And so now they got to look at, I don't see why they wouldn't bring Tanev back. He shouldn't come with a huge price tag. He should have a little bit of a discount to stay in Dallas. He loved it there. He says that the team was great to him. So that should be your first bet. Then re-sign Harley, get him back. I'm not sure what they're going to do in terms of that. I don't know why they wouldn't go long-term unless they have some sort of plan where they need to give him a bridge. Unfortunately, I don't see Suter getting bought out. Just like you said, it doesn't seem feasible. It doesn't seem like they have plenty of options where they can just decide to buy him out. And he plays the role he wants to play is that bottom pair, right? That's where he's pretty good. He can play 12, 13, 14 minutes. But as soon as he had to step up a little bit, it showed. I mean, and it should. He's played in the NHL forever. He's an older guy. He played heavy minutes in Minnesota when he was there. So it's not surprising. I don't put any of the blame on him. He's being put in a role that he's just not suitable for. And so it just kind of comes down to like, there's like so many balls in the air where if one person can just step into that role, if Harley can say, the regular season is who I am, not the playoffs, that settles some things. If Tanev can come back and be put in that spot, that settles some things. Now, if Hakanpää gets re-signed, right, he's a free agent. So how big was that without having him in the playoffs? How big was that versus Lundqvist? What about Petrovic? Is he a so it's just a lot of things. I don't think they want to trust a 20-year-old to jump in and be a full-time NHL player yet. So it really comes down to, I think, get your guys back, get Tanev and get Harley re-signed, and then just find a way to put some pairings together that allow guys to be in the role they need to be in. And maybe find some right-handed defensemen. That's why Tanev needs to come back. It's crazy seeing how little right-handed defensemen they've had over the years and how much trouble they've had to do that. And the fact that Miro Heiskanen's been playing on his offside for like the last 4 years is just kind of a crime for how good of a player he is. So I think that the short answer is there's a lot of balls in the air. They have their priorities, and I think they need to make sure they lock those down and then go from there.
Yeah, they need right shot defensemen very, very badly. And that's one of the reasons I want Nils Lundqvist to work, right? And I feel like I've tried to convince myself and talk myself into him being ready, right? Being ready for the playoffs. He had a decent month. I want to say it was March, and I know it wasn't against the best of competition, but it was me trying to will him into the lineup and being ready. And then you could tell that he was just not ready, and he was playing 3 to 5 minutes a game. And that wasn't going to cut it at the end of the day. Before we segue into just some free agency talk in general, I'd love for you to just share your thoughts on Joe Pavelski. I know you put some of it on Twitter, but you got to be around him and just what he meant to the Stars organization. Like, how much of an impact did he really have? It was a short stint in the grand scheme of things, but in his career, but it's almost funny to think back, and it's like, oh, I even forgot he played in San Jose. I just feel like that's how much of a part he's been of the Stars since he's been here. And would love for you to share some thoughts on him and what could possibly be his career.
Yeah, I mean, he means everything to everything he does. If that's the easiest way to put it. Is you mentioned that people forget he played in San Jose. You know who doesn't forget he played in San Jose is San Jose. And
yes.
It's just he kind of goes to a new place, whether it's a world championship or Olympic team or an international stage, whether it's what NHL team he's on. He comes to Dallas. He struggles a little bit for a few months, and then all of a sudden he's been one of their most consistent players since then. And I almost double take when I look every year, and I'm like, he finished second in points again. Or that was a career high for him at age
39 years old.
Yeah. So it's just crazy what he does. And that's just on the ice. And first things first, nothing he does on the ice has come as an accident. I took a video almost every day at morning skate of him out there 15 to 20 minutes before every other player.
Yeah.
Calls out a defenseman to come out and shoot, works with some skilled guys to work on all the plays around the net. And you see it. Obviously, we didn't see it in the playoffs, but you see it when the goals he scores. It's like how does he know that that backhand needs to go right here? It's because he does it 400 times a day. So
yeah,
nothing that has come by accident for him. He's just the perfect example of hard work. Super low draft pick, comes in, has an incredible career. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Too bad he doesn't win a Stanley Cup. I mean, I think that hurts everyone's heart that ever watched hockey. You can't not root for a guy like Joe Pavelski, but it was really tough for him in the playoffs. Whether that was just him slowing down a little bit, whether that was over pressure, whatever it might have been, it didn't come to fruition. And obviously that was a huge part of the struggles for the Stars. You know, what does 8 to 10 goals from Joe Pavelski do to that playoff run?
Yeah.
If he's able to do, or even 5, you know, what does that do for that playoff run? But you're right. I talked about it a little bit on social media, because I feel like everyone should know what kind of person he is. And he was the kind of guy where if you're in a room with the whole team, or it's one of those games against a Toronto or someone where the media is crazy and everyone's around, you're going to find that Joe Pavelski sitting down as long as there's no one around him, because you can talk about anything with the guy. And I think that's why Wyatt Johnston fits so well living in his house, is because you can ask him a question and he will dive in like it's the most important question in the world. And I'm like, wait, weren't we just talking about like what you eat on Christmas Day? How did we talk about that for 25 minutes? So it's a bummer to see him not win a cup if he is done, which it seems like he is. But in the back of my mind, I think, remember when Zach Parise signed with the Colorado Avalanche at the deadline? Everyone thought he was done.
Yeah.
Remember when Tom Brady came back again? It just kind of feels like that's not ever going to be out of the realm. And maybe it's not even Dallas. I know the Stars fans would hate to see Joe Pavelski, you know, suit up for a different team in the playoffs next year. But whatever it is, whether he gets another chance or not, one of the better people to ever do it on the ice and off the ice. And I think the Stars are going to miss him like crazy. I mean, what he did for that team when he came in, what he did for that team during the tough times, what he did for that team when Pete DeBoer came in. I mean, the role he played with Pete, I think Pete mentioned it 3 times a week in media interviews. It's just, you know, what really helped was Joe Pavelski, or it was really helpful when he came in, when Joe Pavelski talked to him. And it's just all the little things that he did that people don't even know about. It was a huge part of the success of this team. And I think that every player, whether they knew he was going to be done or not, every player was trying to win for Joe Pavelski this season. And I know that hurt them to not be able to do it.
Absolutely. And you look back just through the run in general, right? When Dallas is down 2-0 to Vegas, you don't think Joe Pavelski had an impact there and help put everything into perspective. And of course they spur on to get to the point they were, and unfortunately fall just short. But yeah, hey, go back to Wisconsin, you know, hunt a little bit, fish, and play some golf. And maybe in January, you feel like you're up to it again. So we touched a bit on Chris Tanev and Thomas Harley and the impending free agency that will begin here in the next couple of weeks. We'll segue over to some more decisions the Stars are going to have to make in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit the one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. I know it hasn't got off to a great start for the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals, but who knows? Maybe Luka Doncic and Kyrie can get their game going enough here and make it a series. So go ahead and join in on the fun this summer with FanDuel. Make some money while you're enjoying the postseason on the couch. You also have the U.S. Open here coming up this weekend. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So you touched on Tanev, and look, I concur. I think the Stars should do whatever is necessary to bring him back. And it may help that he's 34 and he's a right shot defenseman as well. And Dallas certainly needs one. And it also helps that he really liked it here. So maybe you can get some sort of a team friendly deal. Another guy that may be looking for the same sort of team friendly deal would be Matt Duchene. And I think I'm of the belief that I'm okay if he walks. If the Stars get him for a good number, I'm not opposed to him coming back. But with Maverick Bourque, you think coming in to finally solidify himself as an everyday NHL player, I think you're going to make up for Matt Duchene's production in other places. But the hard part for me when it comes to Matt Duchene, and maybe I'm just out on him, is 6 points in the postseason. And you bring him in to be productive in those moments, and you just didn't get it. But I know how important he was in the regular season, and he was fantastic, part of one of the most consistent lines for Dallas all year long. But man, that 6 points leaves a really, really bitter taste in my mouth. Am I on the wrong side of this? Should I want him to return? Because it's not that I don't want to, but I feel like, man, I think you can make up for it in other spots, or you can go out and get some bigger guys. I think Dallas needs to get more physical and add some size. Where do you stand on Matt Duchene?
Yeah, you're right on both sides, honestly, because you can look at it either way. I think a big thing for him, obviously, the playoffs, you got to look at it exactly how you said, and he didn't come up big. He had the double overtime series clinching goal, but he didn't have those big moments. But also, a lot of people didn't, and that's the tough part.
Correct.
That Stars are going to have to balance is like, was this just that for whatever reason we couldn't get our guys going, or was this, is this going to happen again? But you're right, he was excellent in the regular season. I think if it was just his play on the ice, I think that you could find a replacement. You put Maverick Bourque in, you bring other guys up the lineup a little bit. Obviously, the Johnston-Stankoven lineup combination was really good. So there are options. The only two things I would say: one, he's a veteran, and they're losing Joe Pavelski. So that, along with Tanev, both those guys, they're all of a sudden up a little bit on their priority list, just because they know we can't lose this veteran presence. It's been so huge for us. I think these guys still need a couple more years with some veterans in order to be able to get to the point they need to get to. The other part is he was so good for Tyler Seguin.
Yeah.
And that's got to be something they really need to look at, especially if all of a sudden you're looking at the forwards next year and Tyler Seguin's getting second line, first line minutes pretty consistently. So I think that that's something that they need to bring into this process is, what does he do for other players? Let's say he comes in and he has another 65, and he has like 65 points. He has another 65 points. That's great. But is that worth blank? And, he's probably not going to get a huge deal anywhere. I think he signed for 1 year, $3 million. So if it's something like that with the salary cap going up next year and the Stars aren't trying to get some big, name that we don't know about yet, it seems like is probably something they want to do. But if you're right, if they're looking for something that's a little more physical, or looking for someone that's younger and brings a similar role, or feel that they can replace that with someone from within, then that's a serious question they have to ask themselves. And it's really just so much of that depends on where they really want to place their priorities. And they now don't have that top. I know we didn't see it all year, but they don't have that top line anymore with Pavelski leaving. So now someone has to go there. And a lot of people think that might be a Tyler Seguin. And so if Sagan's going up there, all of a sudden maybe Duchene's not as important if he's not going to line up with him. So there's a lot of things that go into it. But if you're just looking at it straight away, it's a player who produced really well in the regular season, brought a lot to the group. Seems like he still has some years left in him, and probably would sign for something pretty reasonable. So I think that unless he's asking for something crazy or is getting something on the open market, it's probably something they need to explore.
Yeah. And, I look at this maybe being too picky as just from outside perspective. And Jim Nill, he doesn't have the luxury to be a whole lot picky. And if it's 3.5 or maybe just a bit north of there, then hey, by all means, bring him back. Cause I think he is important. I've just, kind of shooting where maybe Dallas can fill in with others, here in the upcoming season. And Seguin obviously really benefited from it, had 26 goals and 22 of those were at 5-on-5. It wasn't a power play. He wasn't a power play merchant by any stretch of the imagination. So I want to ask you maybe who your golden child is of this free agency class. I have one, and it would be Brett Pesce. I don't know why. I really love him, and maybe it's because he's an Eastern Conference team. We don't see him that much, and then when we do see him, it's like, wow, he's really good. I think he would be my golden child if Dallas could go out and get him. Obviously, that may not be in the cards if they re-sign Tanev and all that good stuff with the number, but he is someone that that's my guy. That's the person I would want. Do you have anybody in this class where you would give up everything to get him on the Stars?
Yeah. I think that I have two answers for this. So
okay.
One of them, I actually didn't even have this on my mind until I saw some analysis going into it. But Steven Stamkos,
yeah,
tell me he doesn't fit Jim Nill's type of player, right?
He's a Joe Pavelski guy,
yeah,
like sort veteran. Of same thing. Yeah.
He's won the cup. He's got a few years probably ahead of him, unlike Pavelski, who's seems to be done, and he seems eager to win. Now, I don't think he's going to go away from the Lightning. I don't know why they would not find a way to sign him back, but that's a guy he's scored 40 goals so many times. He's won 2 cups. He's done so much for the Lightning. So that's a guy, if he becomes available somehow and you can fit him onto your second or third line, it seems like he's also a captain that's another.
How old is
captain. He? I want to say he's 36 or 37, but
I was thinking that. Yeah, no, that would be pretty similar to Joe when he came over.
Exactly. So maybe that's something that could happen. But another guy that I've been hearing a lot about, I don't think he's a free agent, but his name's been out there, is Natchez with the Carolina Hurricanes, who is one of those guys that hasn't really benefited from playing with that system. I think he likes to carry the puck a lot and make plays, and they like to dump it in and play Rob Brind'Amour, dump and chase hockey. So that's someone I think that would be a steep price. I believe they mentioned something about wanting more than just a first round pick and a middle prospect. They want a big name NHL player and maybe a couple of first rounds or something like that. So those are two guys that I think of. But the funny thing for me, this is one of the first years where I'm not really looking at who's out there that's that type of player that can come in.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks to the Stars' current roster, because obviously you look at, hey, we didn't win the Stanley Cup. A lot of fans like to think we need to go make a bunch of changes and find a way to win the Stanley Cup, but it's not always that's not always the case, right? So they're not going to bring back the exact same team. We have a bunch of people we spoke about that are not going to sign. They might find a way to trade a guy like Radek Faksa, or maybe they do find a way to do that with Suter with the buyout. So there's changes that might come, but I don't really see them, unless something comes to them. I don't really see Jim Nill searching super hard for that golden child, as you call it. But those are two guys that if he does, I'd look over there.
Yeah, no, I like those two options. That certainly wouldn't hurt. And I think you're onto something where you're not. I think we're going to see an offseason pretty similar to last year, where it wasn't a ton of splashes. I know Matt Duchene, his name carries a lot, but it seemed like he was one that a lot of teams were maybe out on. I mean, look, the market kind of depended that. I know Duchene probably took less to come to Dallas just because he wanted to be here, but you're looking to sign guys like your Craig Smiths of the world and Sam Steels, guys that can just kind of fill roles. And as a roster in general, is there anything Dallas is missing? Is there a characteristic or a trait you would like them to have a bit more of? From my perspective, just you look at all the Final Fours or just all the Stanley Cup finals, just teams are big. Teams are big, even on the back end. Look at Edmonton. And I know Cody Ceci, Darnell Nurse are not the best pairing in the world, but they have size. And that seems to go a long way. And I know Dallas, that they were dealing with injuries to Hakanpää, which certainly didn't help. But I think up front, if Dallas could get some size and physicality to fill in around your undersized players, because they have a lot of talented forwards that are coming up. And I think for the most part, they're pretty undersized. Like Johnston's not big, Stankov and Bork, right? If you could fill in some more Jamie Benns, right? Some power forwards that can impose their will, because outside of Jamie Benn wasn't a whole lot, I think, from that department of play for Dallas.
Yeah, you're right. And I think they'll be looking at that, I believe, because you can't underestimate the impact Ben has on those two youngsters. I don't think they do what they do without him on their line. It just doesn't happen. And it's not like he's out there, fighting people that hit Wyatt or things like that. He does it very quietly, but his presence, if there's a little scrum around the net, his presence in the middle of that it stops some people from picking on those guys. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right. The Stars don't just have smaller guys. They have small guys. I mean, Wyatt is super skinny. He'll grow and get stronger, but he's a super skinny, tall guy. Logan's one of the smallest players in the NHL. And then you look at even guys that have some size. Jason Robertson's not a super physical. He threw his body around a little in the playoffs because he wasn't scoring as many goals, but he's not going to be the guy that's doing the Jamie Benn stuff. Tyler Sagan's not really doing that kind of stuff. Rope Hintz could probably do some more of it with his size, right? But he doesn't do a whole lot of it. So
a little fragile, though.
Yeah,
I'll give him that.
That's the other thing. I mean, we could go into his injury issues for a whole podcast because it's just killed the Stars in so many different playoffs over his career. But it does feel like they could use that. And like you mentioned, Hakanpää, I think that might have been the biggest reason that he was missed is that size to just stop, end some plays once in a while. You know, don't let teams like Vegas get in that cycle that they got in so much in those first couple games. Don't let Edmonton rush up and down the ice because you end up playing a different style. You know, if you're the Stars, when the Stars were playing their game, no one was going to beat them. Like legitimately, if they had played their style, I don't think anyone would have beat them. But as soon as they stopped if they got nudged a little in the other direction, they flipped and played a totally different style that usually went better for the teams like Colorado or Edmonton. So I would have actually loved to see them play Florida because they play similar styles, those two teams. So it would have been funny to see just style on style, how that would have matched up. But I think that you're right with those type of players. And that's why I think that they'll look at guys like Smith or Steele coming back. Whereas you think, hey, they could fill that role with a younger guy. They don't need to sign this veteran guy, but you can't underestimate at least having one or two of those guys in that lineup to do that. And they have some in the, in the prospect pool that are going to come up. You mentioned Bixel. He's going to be pretty big, pun intended.
He's a large guy.
So that kind of stuff is important, and it's a different game. Like we're not in the 1990s anymore where you need these big Scott Stevens guys to do that, but you still need it. It's still hockey. It's not basketball where you can run up and down the court and not worry about people bumping into you and playing you tough. And that's in a moment where the Stars are struggling to score. I think they went almost 3 games in a row with only 1 goal in that series against Edmonton. Those are the moments where they're probably getting pushed around a little bit. We might not see it. It might be between the whistles or little things, but they're not imposing their will. And that's one way you can impose your will. If you're not playing your style of game, you can find a way to at least push them back a little bit off their style of game. And I think it's from, I believe it's from the show Shoresy. He talks about running them up and filling them in. And that's a perfect example. If you can't run them up and score the goals, fill them in and impose your will, push them off their game, gives you a little more room for you to be on your game. So it'll definitely be something they're looking at over this summer to make sure they have that within their skilled players as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great point on the Edmonton series as well. Just for the most part, and I know at 5-on-5 it was really close and Dallas outscored them, but it felt like for large parts of the series, Dallas never had Edmonton contained. It just felt like they were never playing their game. I felt like for most of the year when Dallas was dictating play is how I would sort of describe it. You could just feel it. Like they were comfortable. They almost understood where the opponent was going at all times, and they had their control in the game. And against Edmonton, it just felt helter-skelter. And that was never a style that Dallas was very good at. It's just the kind of pucks bouncing around. And obviously it helps when McDavid is just flying a million miles an hour. But it was never felt like they had the Oilers contained for much of that series. Let's move on to some draft talk, maybe jump into some more conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the Four Nations tournament as well. I know there's some fun things upcoming here in the just hockey in general, which will be a ton of fun. So we'll do that in just a moment. All righty, we have the 2024 NHL Draft coming up here in the next couple weeks, and Sam, from your perspective, I guess maybe this is an easy answer, but what is Dallas you think they're aiming for? What are they looking for in this year's draft? I think it's always interesting to look back a few years from certain drafts and just think like sometimes there's a theme. There's a theme with each draft class, and a couple of years ago it was all defensemen that the Stars drafted. Is there a sort of theme that you're expecting from Jim Nill? They have certainly hit over the last after the last few years, especially in some deeper rounds. So what are you looking for here out of this draft class in general?
Yeah, it's been weird with the draft because it's so easy to think if you don't have a top 10 pick, the draft is kind of just whatever. And you have to wait 6 to 8 years before you see if any of those players even hit. But it's not been the case for the Stars lately. And so for them, they need to take it just as seriously as they have over the last 4 or 5 years, because there's players out there and they clearly have an edge in whatever the reason is. With their scouting team has an edge, and they find a way to draft players that not only hit, but hit pretty quickly. And, they know what they're doing. So I believe they have only first, fifth, and seventh, I think, are their 3 picks this year.
Correct.
Due to a bunch of trades that got rid of some picks. But you got a 31st pick, so you're not getting a Connor McDavid, type of player in there. But I think for them, you have two minds. You have what skill is out there, because the skill in today's game, we talked about the physicality, but that's out there to find. You can find the physical players. You don't need to go draft a guy because he's physical. I don't think anyone really does that in general. Yeah. But the skill that's out there, if there's a forward that's available when they get to them, there's a few guys. Ryder Ritchie's a guy that I've heard his name a lot compared to with the Stars, and I believe he's like the 18th ranked skater in the draft, but people see him falling down to potentially the end of that first round. So the skill is number one, but then we mentioned it, right-handed defenseman.
Yeah.
Why not draft him? I mean, I think the Stars have only drafted like 4 of them in the last like 10 years or something like that, right?
Yeah, and the big note was as well, just think about the ones that even played good time in the NHL, like Klingberg is like number one. And then you have Honka. And then the other is Maximus Fortunas, if you remember that name. Like those are developed right-handed defensemen. They just haven't even developed a ton of them as well as drafted. So
So look, there is my opinion. So I think that you have to focus on your team right now, but the Stars and every other team, we're kind of moving away from the rebuild phase of NHL, right? Unless you are the San Jose Sharks and you are really a trash fire that needs to blow everything up in order to get back up to where you want to be. That's not going to be every team. It used to be kind of, you make a run for 4 years, you rebuild, or you make a run for 5 years, you rebuild. Now teams are trying to avoid a rebuild. And look, the Stars pretty much did, right? That's how we ended up where we are right now. And I know Jim Nill's trying to keep that going. So you have to look down the line and think, what has hurt us a lot over the last 10 years? Well, number one has been we haven't had right-handed defensemen. We have our potentially one of the best defensemen and players in the NHL playing on his offside.
Yeah.
It alarms me how little they seem to care about that. And while I really want to buy into everything Jim Nill and Pete DeBoer say, they're also in the position they are in where they have to, share that they're not emotional. That's why it was so surprising when Pete freaked out on the reporter in that, post press conference, is like, normally they're so calm. And so when they say we're not worried about Miro, he plays great on both sides, that's great. But he's on the left side for a reason. That's like saying, hey, you know what? Connor McDavid's the best player in the world, but we have him on defense and we're okay with that. It's like, no, you're not. Deep down, you're not. So I think that's got to be number one, is think what has hurt us. Let's draft heavy on that, because like I mentioned, you're not getting a guy at 31 that you're knowingly going to jump right into your lineup and be a great player. And then your fifth and seventh, they could be a Jamie Benn, Joe Pavelski, or they could be someone who never makes it to NHL. So why not develop them properly and at least give yourself a chance to hit that mark with those right-handed defensemen or super skilled guys that they can develop to be what they want to be. So the draft is just such an odd thing in the NHL, because the NFL is like NBA. Those guys are like, here's the guys that are going to play. Where do they fit in our lineup next year? It's like, you can't look at where do they fit in our lineup in 7 years. So look at what your biggest weaknesses are and draft that, like they did when they drafted a bunch of defensemen way back. They drafted, I think, 2 or 3 goalies one time. So they'll know what their goal is. And I think that right-handed defenseman and defenseman in general should be number one.
Yeah, you look at the NBA and, teams like 6, maybe 7, maybe 8, like maybe they have 8-man rotations. It's just it's a completely different ball game. And Dallas, of course, that was one of their strengths. They have depth. They have a ton of depth, and but they certainly need to add to it in the defensive department. And you bring up Miro, and yeah, it's just it can be so frustrating, but he is so world class that you don't think about it a lot. But what you do think about is the potential he would have if he was on his strong side. Right. Where it eats me is every time I have to see Miro Heiskanen go to the wall on his backhand and peel a puck off the sidewall and bring it to his forehand and then have to shimmy 3 times to make some space for himself to get a shot through. And boy, he does it very well. And boy, it is a lot of fun to watch. But I envy the fact that if he could just be on his strong side and peel a puck off the left wall and he just drags it and walks, like it's just so much less time or you have so much more time to make his move. And he gets a lot of shots blocked. He also gets a lot of shots through, but right. I think even if he's on his strong side, it's ability for him to take it to another level offensively. And I don't think he's ever going to be a Cale Makar offensively. It's just not his game. It's not his intuition. He wants to be a defensive-minded kind of two-way defenseman, like Nick Lidstrom. He always points at as kind of his model. So yeah, they need to find a way to get him on his strong side. But as you mentioned, they're just like, oh, whatever. But they also don't have a luxury to do that as well in a lot of ways. So we'll kind of see where that goes down the line. Would love to hear your thoughts just on some general hockey things. Just the Four Nations tournament, I think it's going to be a ton of fun. As someone, growing up, and I think of was it Vancouver, whatever it was, the big Sochi run or the golden goal from Crosby, and watching the USA game, USA Canada. Like that's going to be a lot of fun. I think the NHL is doing the right thing about kind of imposing their will on it to some degree. And hey, we're going to have the best players play against each other, because it's really the only time you can get all-star game, like real all-star games, because with 3-on-3 and all the goodness, it's just not the same. So I'm pretty stoked for it. What says you?
Yeah, I agree. I think the NHL waited long enough for the Olympics to work out perfectly, or for the certain tournaments to come to fruition that just didn't. And I think that they're absolutely doing the right thing, and having that, not just having that, the best on best international, which we've all missed. I think many people's favorite hockey memories are from Olympics and from those tournaments, World Cup of hockey, and not just having that, but also not having the All-Star game, which, let's be honest, has become a joke. It was hard to watch this year, how awkward everything is, how little the players want to be part of certain things.
Yes.
It's just time for, maybe there's a way to do that properly, and whatever it is, hopefully NHL figures it out. But taking a break from that and playing best on best hockey, and also giving guys, like, I know so many players that I forget who it was this year that already had their trip booked for vacation, and then ended up getting called to the All-Star game, and you could visibly see I'm so excited, but they're not. And it's, why would you be like, you got to go cancel your family vacation and go play more hockey that's meaningless. And so I think this is going to be really huge, because even though it's not the Olympics, this is it right now. Like, you have to look at the World Cup of Hockey was it when they had it 2016, 15, whenever that was. And this is going to be it now. And having those 4 teams play each other will be so cool to see, especially during the season, which is really rare. You just hope, the one thing I'm hoping is you don't see some injuries. That's something that you just have to deal with. You can't hide these players because of a potential injury. So it'll be really cool to see. I know the Stars will have their eyes on it. Stars fans will have their eyes on it, with plenty of names on their current roster that could be playing for these teams, will be playing for these teams. But yeah, I think international hockey is just the best thing. And it's awesome to see they're doing that. And it's awesome to see they're going back to the Olympics as well.
Yeah, and the All-Star game is for the fans, number one. It's not really for the players, but this sort of feels like it's for the fans as well. So you kind of have to take that as part of it. And yeah, I mean, Finland's half the Stars roster is gonna be on Finland with the whole mafia they got going there. So that'll be a ton of fun in general. And when the Olympics rolls around again, it'd be nice to maybe have some of the the NHL guys join that. And as much as I enjoyed having the amateurs to some degree play, as someone that went to school at St. Cloud State, there was a multiple of players that went to St. Cloud that were on the Olympic teams over the last few years, and that's obviously very cool. I mean, our coach Brett Larson was a part of the coaching staff, and that was awesome. And it's fun to see those guys compete, and it gives you a little that 1980 feel once again. But it really will never be the same. So I think that'll be great for the game of hockey in general, and hopefully when the Olympics rolls around once again. So. All right. Well, that's all I got for you today, Sam. I appreciate it. Please let the listeners know where they can find your work. I know you have great stuff kind of littered all over the place, so make sure you get all your platforms down for people that want to find your work.
Yeah, sure. Well, you can see Sam Nestler. Twitter is the easiest way to find my stuff. I have my Substack, I think it's called Sam's Story Substack, which covers mostly the Stars, also some Devils, college hockey, other NHL stuff. And then I'm, as you mentioned, littered across of the Daily Faceoff and all of their affiliated sites. So you can see my stuff anywhere on there, but follow me on Twitter is the best way. And I'll never lose my Stars, even if I'm moving across the country or covering other teams. I'll always get some Star stuff in there. So it's good to talk with you, Joey. I appreciate you having me on here.
Absolutely. Well, that's good to hear. The Stars fandom will never go away. Well, appreciate it once again. We'll have to make you a more regular scheduled guest. I'd love to get you on here a bit more. It's a shame that I waited like an entire year, but we'll get you on here more often as we move along. Alrighty. Well, that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Hit that notification bell, never miss an episode. And we'll continue this off-season trek, man, and we'll have some fun. Alrighty, Stars fans, enjoy today. Enjoy your Monday, and then we'll see you tomorrow. So long, Stars fans.